Awesome. So yeah, I'm actually excited for this week's session. We skipped the last week because of the holiday period. The first design review for CI/CD UX team was amazing. I think we have been looking at the work of Juan and Ian, and were some of the great design work, but also amazing feedback shared. So I'm looking forward to this session as well. I've seen that we have 2 subscriptions, if we can call it this way. So we're gonna first see some work from Dimitrie, and then we're gonna go for Juan's project as well. So I'll just give it over to Dimitrie to share his work.
All right, let me share my screen. Set this up. Should be good with this one. So now you see the agenda, right? For some reason, my Zoom external window is different from normal. Now it's horizontally displayed. Let me see. So parent-child pipelines. I'll give a brief introduction as to what it is, and then I'll dive into actually a specific design decision I still need to make, and actually relate in the bottom of this issue that I'll be reviewing this design inside of this meeting and gather your advice as to what the decision is going to be, and then post it afterwards. So we have a direct actionable thing out of this meeting. To begin off, parent-child pipelines, it will be a little different from multi-project pipelines. So where a multi-project pipeline has a pipeline starting a pipeline in another project, which are both equally independent pipelines, but one is triggered by the other. We refer to those as a upstream being the pipeline that triggers a downstream pipeline, basically. So upstream and downstream. With parent-child pipelines, we are gearing towards the customers that have larger repositories such as monorepos, and they want to do some more or have more advanced inner structuring of their pipeline within the same project. So they do not want to jump between microservices. They want to have CI configuration capabilities within the current project. And parent-child pipelines basically is what it says. I know it's kind of obvious, but it is a pipeline living inside of another pipeline, or even multiple pipelines living inside like a main pipeline. There are some considerations. The child pipeline, as we currently define the scope, goes only one level deep. So child pipelines cannot currently have child pipelines of their own. This will be discovered later on if we decide it is necessary or it's to be prioritized, etc. But it also made the technical implementation a little bit simpler. So with that out of the way, the things that we will be doing is we'll be relying as much as possible on existing UI. And basically where we got down to is that for a pipeline similar as multi-project pipelines, for a pipeline to trigger another pipeline, be it a pipeline in another project or a pipeline within the current pipeline, which we're introducing with this feature, that will need a trigger job, basically a job that triggers a pipeline. And for multi-project pipelines, we decided in the past that the trigger job, as it does not have a real job log of itself, it just triggers something internally, it is not clickable, it's not navigatable, it's like a spoof job, but it allows us to see, like, all right, in which stage, for example, does the current pipeline trigger a downstream pipeline. I want to quickly navigate towards a pipeline to give you an indication of how it looks like.
Yeah. Dimitrie, and actually a question, I was typing it, but let me just ask it since you paused. Can you give a real life example of in what case a child pipeline is created? Does it mean that it's like a smaller piece of functionality is being kicked off as the bigger part of code, or?
Yeah, so it allows us, or the people creating a pipeline, to have a, so let me see how I should explain this. So in a pipeline, I will grab a example here, is disregard the weird wiring, but what basically happens in a pipeline is you've got stages, and these stages have different jobs inside of them. And these jobs inside of the same stage are run concurrently. So they all start at the same time, and they wait before moving on towards the next stage until they're all finished, either failed or successful. With a child pipeline, what you'll be able to do is that instead of just aligning with those different stages, you'll be kicking off an independent pipeline within the current pipeline, which allows for further customization as to which jobs depend on which other jobs, because that sub-pipeline will have its own stage structure, basically. You can go even deeper into that with directed acyclic graphs, which is another functionality which allows jobs to independently rely on other jobs within the pipeline. This pipeline is actually such a pipeline where, for example, this review app didn't rely on the jobs within these stages which have all been canceled or failed. It relied on very few previous jobs, probably only the first stage, but it still got its own kind of like thematic stage defined. So it could still run, but that is getting a little bit off into a tangent. Similar to DAGs, child pipelines basically allow the user to have a more granular control over how which jobs run when, and also as to make it so that the pipeline is a little bit more manageable in its configuration. So for a pipeline to be configurable, you need a GitLab CI YAML. We have a few options there. We have an include, basically, which allows you to include another file into the main configuration file. And with child pipelines, that will actually work similarly, because a child pipeline will have its own configuration file, which will be referenced in the main GitLab CI YAML file with the trigger job, basically. So the trigger job says, hey, run this other pipeline as well, which has its own .gitlab CI YAML file, basically. Does that answer your question, or should I highlight a few points better?
Yeah, I was that does, and I was actually more kind of like interested in a real life example. Does it mean that, you know, that yeah, it's kind of like a part of application being published within a part of another, like of the bigger application, or something more like a real case scenario? So less technical terms, but like kind of an example from a real life when the user would need to use a child pipeline triggers from the parent.
Yeah, so for sure, say that in a real life example, you might want to have a Docker container built. And that Docker container build is an additional deliverable from the current project. Say that it's a release from a library or something like that. But that's Docker container is, for example, targeting an environment in which a iOS application can be built, and there's another one that creates a Docker container for Android development.
Right.
And they will independently be able to publish their deliverables or their artifacts without relying or needing to rely on, for example, their counterparts.
Gotcha. This is clear. Yeah, thanks.
All right, cheers on that. So let me see. I'll quickly go a little bit down into what I'm actually interested in is towards the design decision still to be made. So this little wireframe kind of depicts how the trigger job that will refer to a child pipeline will look like. Will have a label or tag attached to it, which makes it a little bit different from all the others. Because a trigger job referring to a child pipeline, or basically which triggers the child pipeline, will be navigatable as the pipeline actually lives inside of the current pipeline from a cognitive model, basically. The point now is, and here's what I'm gonna go to. I wanted to let me show you within this example, but this one basically doesn't have a downstream, so I'm gonna scroll the way down. I'm gonna show you a little video. Let me see. So I think it's the above one. Do you see this, or is this unwatchable? Like, do you see a video playing right now?
Really tiny.
No.
No, right?
Here goes.
Better.
Oh, and now I clicked it away. Sorry, it was my fault. We should be able to do it like this, I think. So let me see, skip a little bit forward. All right, I don't want this with it. It's sad that the gray area kind of destroys the point. You could view it when it was full screen or not?
It is right now. It is full screen.
Okay, good.
I think
So
it just dropped some frames, so it's not super clear too.
can you see this downstream stage column?
Yes.
Okay, that's the thing I want to talk about. So the initial idea with this design was that as a child pipeline lives within the current pipeline and is not in fact a downstream pipeline, which would be another pipeline within another project, I would not want to display it there because also there's some consideration. So in another pipeline, in another issue, we're editing this graph to be more specific in its or more usable in its design, and these things will actually display the project information as well. As the child pipeline lives within the current project and current pipeline, that information is not necessary, and therefore the idea was to have the trigger job be the navigation element to navigate towards the child pipeline. The point is that engineering has stated that if we want to display the child pipeline in the downstream column, we basically get it for free. This gives us a few upsides. The upsides is that it will be viewable inside of this stage, inside of this column, and if you click on it, it will expand in line. So basically, if I watch this a little bit further, it will be shown to us, I think. So let me see if they're now going to click on it. I think they should. So here you see that they clicked on it, and inside of that pipeline there's this one stage which has two jobs basically. So you're able to expand in line. Where I'm unsure if this is needed for a child pipeline, but it is a nice feature to have. But this is what I indicated towards the developers, that I do not want to implement things just because they come for free. There's the additional configuration idea that this way, if it's displayed the same as a downstream or an upstream, the mini pipeline graph, and I'll show that in a different way. Let me see. So here in a mini pipeline graph, it will be displayed that there is another project triggering this mini pipeline graph. Basically, will be depicted like that. It's kind of vague showing it off like that. The idea is here, so the decision to make is, are we going to display child pipelines the same way as a downstream? And if so, how do we want it to be different? Because just showing them similar as a downstream is misguiding the user, basically, as that is not a peer pipeline, but it is a child pipeline. It's hard to really, correctly describe all the implications this has, but it does allow for a more accessible child pipeline, even though it might not be per se needed. Perhaps some initial comments might be welcome now to perhaps make the problem space a little bit clearer after questions and such things.
Can I ask us a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
What would you consider the fundamental difference between a downstream attribute and a child? What would be like the one sentence difference between the two?
Good question.
That's a good question. The fundamental difference is that a child pipeline is part of the current pipeline and is not a separate peer pipeline. Does it make sense?
And a downstream pipeline is its own entire pipeline event situation?
Yes. So in that way, it could be considered the same, except that it's different from a pipeline in another project. So it lives within the current project, and it's surfaced in less views.
Is there any connection in, for example, if the child pipeline is failing, then the parent fails as well, and maybe that's not the case with the downstream?
That's a good point. That depends, because the trigger job can be configured in such a way that it either depends on the status of the child pipeline, and thus the job either says, all right, the main pipeline fails or not, or it cannot care. Like it can say, it triggered the child pipeline, and with that, I'm successful. That would be similar as a multi-project pipeline, actually, because that trigger functionality, trigger job functionality is actually the same. Mm-hmm. The suggestion by engineering is that they would like to implement it, and their suggestion is to make it more clear that it's a child-parent relationship instead of a multi-project relationship. And I think it's a sound advice. I wanted to pass it by you. What do you think, if that is the only thing necessary to do? And just to give a small example of how the multi-project pipeline is, here we are looking at a pipeline which has a upstream pipeline. This is actually an interesting case, because are we going to, the child pipeline will never be surfaced within the merge request widget, which is something I need to discuss with the engineers here. But I don't think this is basically mock data, so it wouldn't make sense to have it fully configured as we want it in the end.
Mike,
it's quite
on your side, I'm curious, because I think for some reason that you may be closer to the pipelines with the experience.
I feel like I'm in a time machine. When I first started here, there was a brief minute when I was on Verify working on the DAG, which is a similar type of problem. And so I don't, that doesn't, not really beneficial. It's just nostalgic for me.
Perhaps the basic question. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The thing that's always plagued me about this pipeline view is, like, what is its use? You know what I'm saying? It is a very complex. What is the user really trying to get out of this view? Is it details about the jobs and the status of things, which I kind of feel maybe no, right? Because the other view, the jobs view, is probably a better, like, status of what. So to me, it's really like the goal of this is to understand how these things are connected. Because writing a CI YAML file, especially a complex one, with dependencies and parents and DAG, right? You're writing code that is difficult to visualize. So to me, I think that's the point of this view, is to help you unravel what you have written. Would you agree with that statement?
I'd agree, though it does not cover everything, as I would say that that is important for the person that is configuring the pipeline. For the person that is actually writing the code tested by the pipeline, they would be more interested in making it the information that, like the error information, right? Like why the pipeline failed, accessible. So as a software developer, I want to know, all right, I wrote my code. Apparently something is failing. I want to know why that is, and I want to know it as quickly as possible.
And also maybe the impacts of that, like what
exactly.
part of the tree is going to fall off, what branches are now going to, branches is
yes.
the word you see, but I don't know. It's a tough problem to solve, is to be able to have this view that shows everything but requires such a wide, you know, it can be so tall and both so wide and so nuanced, and
yeah, I would say the question comes down to if you disregard anything I've said, and you would have to visualize a child pipeline, would you do it exactly the same as a downstream pipeline from another project, or should there be differences between the two, and if so, what?
From my understanding, I would first probably clearly investigate what is the difference and how big is that. And I would assume that there are quite some differences. And and probably if it's dangerous for user to mix the two, I would not do that. And actually, like the good question that you asked was if you would just like close your eyes and imagine a child pipeline, like just purely visually visualizing that in my head, for some reason I would more imagine that and let's like just dream right now, more like a pipeline below the parent one, so it more like would open up in the horizontal way, not in the vertical one, because what if it has more stages, right? Because the border between the parent and the child wasn't really visible, and if you would not say that was a child pipeline, if I would be a newbie to GitLab, I probably would never figure that out, especially if that would not be saying child one, child two. So I would more kind of like put it somewhere like down, but that's if dreaming, if ideating here.
I feel like I'm wanting the same thing, where the pipeline is just below, the child pipeline is just below its parent. And then I would almost suggest that you leave it as is and give it like an indicator as to the status of that part of the pipeline, like if it succeeded or if it failed, and then let the user navigate out to that child pipeline and give it its own view, as opposed to trying to force it into the same medium. Because I'm wondering because that's usually what I worry about when we start saying, is this too close to something else? Is if it needs some independence or not. I have no idea if that's helpful, but that's a thought.
I think it's helpful. I would say like the general gist I get out of this is that we want to differentiate at the very least, and do it so in a clear way wherever that's being positioned. And at the same time, you know, if I have to roll back to the scope of this issue, we'll not be able to do much about the current displaying of the pipeline graph. But perhaps there is some in-between ground that we can, for example, have a separate column for child pipelines and a separate column for downstream pipelines. In that way, differentiating between the two in some way.
Couldn't you just as a label? It's basically when it's downstream, it says downstream below, and then when it's child, then it says child. And then you keep the same visualization, but the user now will know that, like, oh, this is a downstream or this is a child. It's a very tiny label.
Yeah, that's similar to what has been proposed here. That the trigger job actually, you know, triggers a child pipeline with it, right, like indicated by a tag.
And then you just respect the model for any instance in which the pipeline is shown. You will always show that label.
Yeah. I'll see how I'll see how that works. I need to visualize it for myself to make sure that is a good indication, because currently with a downstream pipeline, like how it's visualized, it's not so much on this, but currently the whole column is called downstreams basically, which makes it slightly different. Perhaps we can say like, perhaps even just get rid of this and just, you know, put in a tag. This is a downstream, this is a child pipeline, this is downstream, this is another child pipeline, instead of you know, having it being called out as a full stage column. That kind of makes sense. I have to discuss though with engineering, like what they think about that and if that increases the scope by too much, yes or no.
Is there, you said that child pipelines can't have child pipelines, but beyond that, is there any restrictions to their complexity? They can have stages and...
Yeah, exactly. There should be not too much complexity, except that they cannot, you know, go more than one level deep. There are, let me see, because we wrote them up. There are some, let me see. Dynamically generated GitLab CI YAMLs will be currently will be limited by it. So, for example, if a GitLab CI YAML configures another .GitLab CI YAML within child pipelines, we will not immediately support that. But that is that's going to the far end of configurations for CI. That's making it even more complex than it is. I don't think it applies to the current problem space so much.
Gotcha.
I'm sorry I chose such a difficult topic. It's been hard to really visualize and give a good overview of what the design decision is to be made. And some of this, I would say, is also just up to for us to try out to some degree, see how it works out. I do agree that there's lots to be done for the pipeline graph view, as to it's currently already not correctly displaying DAGs. And there is a visual overhaul coming, but perhaps a structural overhaul is needed as well.
Hey, no problem with selecting such a tough one for a change. Why not? And this is why these sessions are here. I hope we gave you some useful thoughts, and I made all of the notes in the document, so feel free to review them. And yeah, hopefully this will give you a little bit of a push to any of the directions.
Thanks. I hope I didn't take too much time.
No, it's perfect. It's just half an hour. Juan, are you ready to deep dive?
Yeah.
Dimitri, was it or anything else that we can help you with?
The other one was more extra if we, you know, flew through this problem space super quickly, but we didn't. So let's I'll give it to Juan.
Awesome.
All right. Just give me 1 minute. All right. I'm just gonna share my screen. Sure. All right. So yeah, I'm gonna be talking about let me, this is the right one. All right, so I'm gonna just also give like a little bit of a quick introduction on like what I wanna get feedback on, but I'm just gonna provide first some context. So yeah, so basically what you're seeing here is like a typical CI/CD pipeline, right? So it's a pipeline that has a source stage, a build stage, a test stage, and then a deploy stage, right? So that's very typical. This is what most customers are doing in one way or another. So what I'm be talking about today is particularly about the test stage, and very specifically about one type of test, which can, I mean, like this type of test could be UI testing, it could be load testing, it could be many types of testing. The important thing here is to understand that this testing happens in the context of a browser. And this is important to know, because it's different from other type of tests, which like are probably looking at the code or looking at like at the APIs. This is actually looking at a browser, or like simulating the app in a browser. So that's basically what it is right? Like this only happens for web applications. And it's very common that in these web applications, you at certain point, you want to test the UI and the app functionality. So many organizations, the way that they do it is that they hire QAs, and the QAs basically like when they receive a branch from the developer. So this is very manual, like many people still do it in a very manual way. They receive the branch, then they build it, then they load it on a browser, and then they start like basically running some like manual tasks, you know, like is the thing that this person just push doing what it's expected to do, and then like basically testing many other things on the UI. The problem with that approach is that, like, first of all, like you never have the ability to like have like a wide range of tests like when you do it manually, because sometimes you can change something and it breaks another thing, you know. So it's very common that you make a small UI change that it looks good. Maybe it's like a CSS style sheet that you change, and then like it looks good on that thing, but you didn't know that that's also affecting another component that it's out of the scope of that view that you're seeing. So that class probably damages another view. So for the QA tester to know that, it's like they have some tools that might allow them to do that, but it's kind of painful. So at the end of the day, what most organizations want to do is they don't want to do this manually. What they want to do is like basically, if you want to run UI testing or like functionality testing for your web applications, what you want to do is like use an automated browser or like a browser automation. And basically what that means is that you get a browser, and the browser loads the app, and then the browser will run the tasks, right? So like instead of like the QA doing that manually, there's kind of like an instruction set about what needs to be done. So that instruction set could be things like click on this button, wait for the page to load 5 seconds, then see if this element loaded or showed up. If it didn't show up, do this, blah, blah, blah. It's like, and like the script can be as long as you need. It can be as complex as you want. So this is very important because it allows organizations to catch visual regressions. It allows organizations to test functionality that is being shipped or released like in very specific ways. And it allows organizations to also find how like new functionality it's creating like issues or regressions in other areas. Because at the end of the day, what's good about browser automation is that browser automation, it's not only gonna test against the view that you just changed, it's gonna run tests against like multiple views, ideally against the whole app, you know, like the whole app is gonna be tested, and then like if there's regressions or if there's bugs, like hopefully it's gonna catch those. So yeah, that's basically what it is. It's you can automate any of these browsers. It depends on the framework that you're using. There's many, like there's some popular frameworks and there's some popular options to do this. There's actually many ways to do it that are not only using frameworks. There's companies that like have like this approach of like actually spinning off real desktops, like virtual machines, and then like running those tests manually, like not manually, like running those tests like as if it was a person doing that. There's also like this all new trend about RPA, which is robot process automation, that it's kind of like another big trend on how like these things can get automated and like tested. So there's many things going on this space, which is always interesting. for this particular case, like what I'm gonna be showing, it's very specific to Selenium. So Selenium is one framework that it's used by many companies, it's not necessarily the industry standard, but it's widely adopted and widely used by many companies. And what Selenium allows you to do is basically, it allows you to do what I just said before. You write a task or an action, and then you pick a browser. You can say like, run this on Chrome, and I want you to run this on this version of Chrome, and I want to run this task against the version, right? So you can do that like against like Chrome or Firefox or Safari or whatever you need to do. And the other interesting thing that you can do is that in certain instances, it can get like, you can even like go as complex as like changing the operating system as well, because that sometimes has an impact in the app as well. When you do all these things, Selenium is gonna need like a way to report that back to like the customer. And the way that they do it is through an XUnit report. So XUnit is like a type of like testing report language, whatever you want to call it. There's many of these type of languages, but they all kind of like respect a similar nomenclature and like a similar way of doing things, and that's called the XUnit. But there's JUnit, there's like many type of reports.
And report is coming in what, in a file or how?
So like the artifacts that are produced from these are usually files or like are outputs in a log. What's important about this is basically the format, right? Like you get this kind of like an XML type of a file that it's parsable, where you can like use that later to show it in a dashboard, or like show it in a graph, or like show it somewhere. It's that's kind of like the positive thing about like being a unified language or like a unified nomenclature, is that it allows you to basically exchange these reports and like upload them to different type of systems, and then like manipulate the data if you need to. So that's kind of like the positive thing about it. All right, so let me just stop this for a minute. I'm gonna share another screen. All right. So that's a little bit of context of what I'm gonna show. Right. Right. Okay. So I'm gonna be sharing some designs, and I need to give a little bit of extra context before I actually jump into the design. So I'm gonna talk over this. So yeah, as I said, so Selenium is like a part of this, So what we're working on testing is basically testing right now on GitLab has the ability of using Selenium, right? So there's a Selenium server that you can, there's ways to actually test against Selenium. So you can bring Selenium into your testing. You can basically pass a file with all these instructions and test those things, and you can get the reports back as artifacts. So as you know, like every job that you run in GitLab is gonna produce an artifact. In this particular case, the artifacts that are produced by a Selenium job are the XUnit report and sometimes the screenshots, and that's an important part of what I'm gonna be talking about. So sometimes the jobs, like the Selenium job, is gonna screenshot the browser to see like basically like a visual regression or like to find an issue. Usually most QA people or like people who are writing these tests, they screenshot at failure time, but that's not necessarily like always the case. Like it happens that most of the times you want to screenshot at failure time, but there's situations where you might want to kind of like screenshot every screen, every view and every action, because you want to do something with those later. One case for that is perhaps have like a system of record of how the UI is changing. So you are not necessarily like finding issues, but you want to see like how things are changing, and you want to see that there's kind of like consistent progression in the change of the app, that there's no like kind of like issues with margins or like small things that cannot be captured in a test, but that they can still be like seen as bugs, right?
Maybe you want to move into the design so we get a little bit of a visual picture. I think.
Yes, I'm gonna do that. So all right, so as you guys know, there's all right. As you guys know, there's when you go into the CI/CD area in GitLab and you go to the jobs and you click in a job, usually what you'll see is it's basically this view, but with a runner with the runner logger. So the runner logger is gonna show you all the things that happen in that job. It's gonna like show some logs. Usually when you are like running tests, like artefacts tests or whatever, it tells you what's failing, what's passing in the context of that. The problem with the way that we currently do Selenium tests is like, first of all, it's very hard to parse that data that is being shown in the runner logger. And second of all, like sometimes like the screenshots are extremely important to see what's going on, right? And the way that you currently find those issues in the, like those artifacts, like those screenshots, is by basically browsing the artifact, and then like it's basically hidden into like multiple folders down, or you gotta download the artifact and then you gotta do the same in your machine just to see an image, which is very painful, right? Like that doesn't make too much sense. And then the other thing is that the XUnit report by itself, it's also not very helpful because you also have to download it, or you also have to open it in your browser, and you have to inspect what's going on and find the issues. So it's not super efficient. So what we're doing in testing is like, okay, we know that this is a very important part of testing. Many people are using Selenium. So why not give them like a pretty view of like these things, so they can basically right away find the issues that they're having with their Selenium tests. So this is basically the view. Like there's many things going on here, so I'm gonna start from the top. So the first thing that I actually talked with Nadia about this, but the first thing that I'm doing here is that I created these tabs. So like the runner logs will be the classic view where you will see the runner logger, and then there will be this tab that is called like the Selenium job summary. The text is indicative, like it doesn't mean that that's gonna be the final name, but like let's say for the sake of the explanation, that's the name. And then there's gonna be this module that's basically showing everything that happened on the Selenium test, right? So if your Selenium test has multiple sessions, you can change the sessions here. Maybe you're running sessions against Firefox and Chrome or different versions of Chrome.
I like your icon. It makes it here.
And then you could change those there, right? And then we have these filters, right? So like basically what you can do here is that you can filter by status. One thing that I did here is hide the past, because sometimes as a developer or as a tester, you don't care about the past, you care about the failed, right? So if you click this toggle, that will like hide all the past tests and it will just show the failed ones. And then there's this toggle expand screenshots. I'm gonna show you in a little bit what it does. And then like there's this summary of the test, right? Like there's 9 tests, like 4 failed, 5 passed, right? These styles, like I got these from like another dashboard, the security dashboard. So like I'm kind of like trying to stay like true to what we already do in other places in GitLab. So yeah, I didn't come up with this, just if people were wondering. And then like finally we have the 2 views. Like one is the reach, like the reach view is gonna show you like all the statuses of each action. The action, it's being described like there's ways to like this data is also very indicative, but like what I'm doing here is showing the kind of like the action description and then like the element that it's targeting, the action it's targeting. So sometimes it's targeting things by the XPath or like the class or the div or the ID or whatever. So showing that, it's also helpful for the tester or like the developer to know like, oh, okay, this test was executed on this particular element. And then there's this other column, which is the screenshot column, which is telling you, okay, did we run a screenshot? Did we take a screenshot when we were running this test? When that happens, there's like this kind of like expand icon, so you can basically like expand it and see like that. What I'm thinking is that ideally, initially, this is always toggled on, like this expand screenshots. So what that means is that every time that you open this view, you're gonna see all the expanded screenshots on, right? So like in this case, we took 2 screenshots in 2 failed cases. And then we have the screenshot, we have the URI. So like if you're running this on a test app, like you can actually click this and like see that on the test app. Or like if you're running this on like some local machine, the URI is also helpful to see what exact path is running when like it took the screenshot. And then there's like more extra data here, like the viewport size at which it took the screenshot, the user agent, which is sometimes important to debug things as well. Of course, if you close these, like if you click these, then like it closes this. If you click one of these guys, then like it just expands that one. So that's pretty much the interaction. And then the other part of this is seeing the raw logs. So like this is like an enriched view, but maybe sometimes you want to see like the raw things of what happened. So in this particular case, this is just showing, similar to the logger, is showing like all the logs on like a raw view, right? So sometimes this is important as well because you want to find like some nuance there. I still don't know if we are gonna like show it like this plain or like we're gonna have like some flavor to this. But either way, I think like that's like the whole point of the raw is just getting the log as it is. So that's what we'll be showing here. Did I have something else here? Oh, okay. So like the other thing that I wanted to show is like this treatment, right? So, and I talked with Nadia about this last week. So she suggested the tabs, and that's what I did. And I'm kind of happy with the tabs. However, I was exploring another way of doing it, which is let's not do tabs. Let's basically have the 2 modules in just one view. So in this case, what I was thinking is the runner logs could be, what we could do is basically collapse these. And then like if you need to see this fully, then you can expand it. And then you can also kind of like basically collapse this as well. So this, by default, when it's a Selenium job, like this one will be collapsed and this one will be expand, but you can, you could play with it and you could basically, no, I don't want to see this. I would just want to see the runner logs, you know?
Maybe you want to give people time to shoot some questions because I'm afraid we're gonna.
No, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I know that's yeah, I remember. Guys, anyone has any feedback, any suggestions, questions?
So I can call out and just say that I'm leaning towards this latter option between the runner logs and the summary job logs to be able to expand and contract.
Okay.
That's just my opinion, because on your other ones, you end up with a tab and a tab, and that can get very confusing for users very quickly, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Right.
Versus this has one like clear architecture. That would be my piece of feedback.
Yeah, I was kind of like leaning to that at the beginning. However, like I also kind of like, I agree with you. Like this can be confusing, but I also feel that there's gonna be instances in which we cannot escape this pattern of like tab and tab. I think what I told Nadia last week, we were talking about this, is like we should probably like somewhere in pajamas specify that like you shouldn't never do more than 3, you know, like maybe 2 is the top, you know, but still I'm not saying that this is not good. This is probably confusing anyway, so.
Yeah, my point there was when we've been earlier talking with Juan is that what if, for example, a browser is remembering the collapsing, uncollapsing state, and if you would have the first how do you say, the first component uncollapsed, and you basically by default missing what's downstairs. This is why I'm not a big fan of these collapse, uncollapse components. But I'm also not sure if we are using any remembering states in GitLab, but also it's a bit dangerous, I feel.
Can I ask a quick question? Do we know how often a user would want to see the runner logs if we present the Selenium job in such a more digestible way? Does it warrant that level of importance? Do we know?
That's a great question. I think that Okay, so prior art, like things that were like done before my time here, and like that we're touching on this topic, they didn't have the runner logs, and these I'm talking about like customer provided mocks, right? Like contributions from the community. So I think like implicitly, I believe people don't care too much about the runner logs if you have the Selenium job summary. However, I don't think that that's a good reason for like hiding them or like removing them or not showing them, because the runner logs are also showing you behavior that happens outside of the Selenium. Before you load Selenium, there's other stuff happening, right? Like Selenium is being downloaded, the container is being like configured. There's many things. So like the runner logs are still important when you are debugging the job, or when you're setting up the job, or when you are like trying to like debug the whole pipeline, you know? So I don't think it's a good idea to like demote the importance of them, like at least not like in a major way. So I think like it's either like tabs or like I don't know. But I get the nature of your question, like, and I know where you're going to, but yeah, it's a hard one.
Can it be perhaps be separated out by personas using it? So there's a setup persona, the person who actually sets up the Selenium tests, and then there's the consumer persona who actually consume the tests on a regular basis, which would be similar as, for example, setting up CI is not the same persona as the one that actually is going to let their code test. There's a separation there, so that might make it
That's
more clear as to why there should be importance for both.
That's an interesting appreciation. My question, and this is me coming from like being completely ignorant. How do you set up? How does GitLab manage like personas, like in terms of like the render UI? Do you pick that when you're like? I'm not sure. Like I was under the impression that like you get GitLab and that's what it is, but I don't know if there's like some setup like that allows you to like change the way things are shown. I don't know if that makes sense.
I'm like unsure what you're specifically. Do you mean like that you have different permissions as a certain user, or are you thinking about our way of designing and personas we've defined?
Yeah. So like there's definitely like persona, like different personas that like there's definitely like one type of persona that will benefit out of like having the runner log, and there's definitely one persona who will be like, I don't care about these. What I'm not entirely sure is how do we currently differentiate that at the app level, at the UI level? How
configurable UI basically, like can I configure which things I want to see in the app?
But we have that. I mean, this is me. Like, I'm still asking. Like, do we have a way to set up that?
Do we have those things when I want to switch off some of the features if I'm not interested?
Currently, we do not support that. So GitLab is a fits everyone, and you just use the features that are useful to you. There's no personalization of features becoming visible to only you, for example, as being a support engineer. You're only interested in certain things versus a designer who is only going to be interested in mostly issues. But still, right? Like there's always going to be some overlap. For example, us as designers might be interested in the code in a merge request. Should we not be able to view that? I don't think so. But it might be useful to say, but that is at a very high level. We certainly do not support that currently.
Got it. No, but I understand what you're saying. Like at least at the I think that the other. I don't think it's such a big deal to like do it like this way. I don't think it's a big deal to do it this way either. At the end of the day, what's gonna happen, like it's kind of like coming back to what you're saying, Dimitri. The persona, it's almost at this level, it's almost gonna dilute completely, because once you click on a Selenium job, almost everyone has the same goal, which is like seeing what happened with the Selenium job. If you happen to be like a DevOps engineer who needs to debug the job, you're gonna find the runner logs like easily, like because that's your job. You're gonna be like, oh, where's the runner logs? Okay, they are here, or like they're here, So I think it's more like a matter of I'll think more about it. There's definitely
Any
with the
final concerns
Yeah,
from anyone
can I,
else? Except of the...
can I throw
Oh, yeah, sure,
one
sure.
quick point? And I hate to point out a problem without a suggestion on how to solve it, but there is a bit of a namespace collision here. So now you
Yeah.
have passed and failed of the Selenium tests, but the test itself has a passed and failed as well. So I don't know how to solve that, but there could be definitely some confusion about
That's
like, what does passed mean? Does it mean it passed all those passed, or does it mean it successfully ran?
yeah.
It's a bit of a naming collision.
Yeah, that's so true. That's an excellent question that I'm gonna answer in just like 30 seconds. Ideally the job, if it fails here, it should report back to like the upper job that it failed. So like they should be failed. So and no instance you should have like failed things here that pass here. So like this is maybe like a defect of the mock, but there could be situations in which like this pass and like there's failed things, and I could dig more into that. So the answer to that is you're right. I'm gonna look into that. There's definitely like a name, like it needs to be more clear.
Nice spot. So we have 1 minute. Anything else that Juan should look into before we're gonna drop off? And also feel free to add your comments into the doc if you want to.
I have a quick one to consider,
Yeah.
but let's not dive into it in that case because we have the other meeting. But the UX raw, or the raw output of the, can you scroll to the right? So here you have the raw output. Isn't that the same as the runner logs to some extent? Is it duplication of content? And in that way, exactly, like, is it needed here? Or can you just show the rich version, and the developer that sets it up has enough with the runner logs itself?
Yeah, good call out. It's not the same. So that's the basic answer. It's different.
All right, I think unfortunately we have to drop to the other session. Thanks so much, Juan. Thanks so much, Dimitri, for showing your work. If anyone has anything else to add, please put some comments into the files. It was useful for me, at least, for sure. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.